All right, everybody, just a really quick video on how to install these paddle mods. There's not a lot to it. I know there might be a couple people though that are a little intimidated and don't usually deal with these type of things, so I wanted to run through it really quick. First things first, there are 4 screws in the back of the controller. 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're Phillips head screws, lefty loosey. I've already removed them for the sake of brevity. After that, there's a seam that runs all the way around the controller. It'll separate at those seams. There's actually several clips that hold it together. The first time you do this, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get apart. After that, it becomes increasingly easy if you take it apart a few times. The easiest way to start is up toward the paddles at the triggers at the top. If you just stick you want to use a plastic spudging tool, not a metal spudging tool, because you'll damage the plastic on the outside, if that's possible. But really, you can use anything that'll fit inside the seam if you don't mind hanging up your plastic a little bit. You'll just start up here and you pull it apart. I've already had mine apart a few times, so I can just use my fingers and pull it apart kind of easily. Once you get it to separate, it comes apart pretty good. It feels a little bit like you might break it. Just be careful and run it through slowly. When you take it apart, you actually want to turn the buttons face down, because you have 2 rumble motors that'll just flop out if you do not. So as you can see, they kind of popped out a little bit on me. It's okay. There's a wire slot on each side. All you do is kind of set it back down into that and make sure you're not going to smash them when you put it back together. And you're going to set this up. Not going to need it for now. We're looking at it as this back piece. So these are the original buttons for it. As you can see, it's just sitting on a little plastic spring, all 4 buttons on the same plastic spring. And that is the piece that I have redesigned with paddles in it. So it should come off. It's just sitting on these 5 pins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pins. You're just going to get under a little bit. You want to be careful because you don't want to break these pins, and eventually it'll pop out. It's not on there very tight. These are just very thin pins, so you want to be careful. This is the original button spring. We're going to toss that to the side. Keep up with it because you might want to put it back in. You never know. Take your 3D printed springs. Place them in. They should sit in exactly the same. What you're going to want to do is make sure you push them all the way down onto the pins. Once you have them in, make sure all your buttons push up. Make sure your spring functions. They're not going to move very far. The actuation is very short. After that, I've also designed the rear switch to match it. So you can remove the rear switch. You can see it has a little angle on it, so it's actually directional. You can't flip it around. Set that to the side. Also keep up with it just in case. Here's the one I've designed. And it might be really difficult to see. I don't know if the camera's going to focus on it, but it's angled. So one side is thin and one side's thick. What you're going to do is the thin side needs to go towards the bottom of the controller. So it's just a little tiny square that fits right over the switch right here. It's going to be a tight fit. It's supposed to be. Make sure it moves back and forth. All right. I forgot to mention, the first time you take this controller apart, there is actually a charger cord that is plugged in over here. You might be careful not to just rip it out. All right. I'm not going to plug mine back in because I don't wirelessly charge. I'm always plugged in. So I'm just going to leave it unplugged for now because I'm taking this controller apart over and over, test fitting things. Once again, make sure your wires aren't going to be smashed. These rumble motor wires kind of get in the way sometimes. You got to be very careful. All you got to do is tuck them down so that they're not against the clips, and make sure that they're in the tiny wire cutouts on each side. Like I said, I'm not going to plug mine back in, but at this point, you would plug this wire that I have just hanging off the side right here. I just kind of have it tucked into a slot where it's going to be safe when I put it back together without plugging it in. It plugs in right here. You'll see when you take it apart that you're going to have to unplug it. So you just place it back on top. Should click back together. Make sure all your buttons click. I have noticed that the first time I put these in, sometimes they don't click perfectly. If you just give them a couple firm pushes and play with them for a second, they actuate way, way better. You can hear this one's taking a second. Eventually they just loosen up and get perfect. All right. Then you will take your 2 printed paddles. I have already inserted their 4 M6 screws. I tried to make it where you could use M8 screws, but I didn't want to make these paddles too thick, so M6 is going to be what they are. You can see which side they go on. It's pretty clear. You can't switch them up. They're keyed, so they just push up into the squares, and the screw hole should sit perfectly over their counterpart screw holes. I've already inserted the screws into the paddles before I've started. You might do this too, because when you try to do it on top of the controller, these buttons move so much, it's kind of a pain. Screw them in one by one. I do remember that these are plastic and there are no metal inserts for the screws. So once you bottom it out, do not keep twisting or you will strip it. Trying to make sure they're flat against it and then stop. Second paddle. Pardon me. You got to make sure it's aligned or you'll start pushing the paddle out of the key. Again, it's plastic, so don't over torque it. Once you strip it, it's done. It's stripped. You will likely not get a screw back into it smoothly. Unfortunately, they will work with 1 screw. I put 2 just so it wasn't too much stress on 1. All right, and there we have it. And as you can see, very short trigger pulls. Very satisfying click on all triggers. I've also got these positioned to where they almost match the Xbox Elite controller, which is the controller I'm coming from, so it feels pretty comfortable if you're moving over from that one. Make sure your switch moves back and forth. There you have it. Everything clicks, everything functions. All you gotta do is go in game and test it. Thanks, folks.